Hello, I'm Steve Johnson. Welcome to DigitalWERX TV. This is our data zone where we talk about stuff that's not necessarily about engineering, but things you'd like to know, I think. All right, Claus Martel is our guest, and Klaus is the former retired senior command historian for the Army Materiel Command in Redstone Arsenal, and before that, you had worked for the Army Aviation and Missile Command as a deputy historian. And you've been you worked at Redstone Arsenal for 38 years,
Right.
And you're a historian. So who else, living and in this town, could I talk to about history of Redstone Arsenal and get more information?
That's me.
Okay. By the way, if you hear any construction sounds, you are really hearing construction sounds, but don't worry about it. We're not going to let it bother us. Okay, let's start out. My sense of it is that even people living in the greater Huntsville community don't know all that much about Redstone Arsenal. Now, and part of that is people used to know it really well because they lived it, but generations change and we forget stuff. But let's go back to when Redstone Arsenal was a bunch of farmland. How did it become, how did it get started? Tell me about the beginning.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story because it was a conglomeration of different events and really people in this town. So not to get into the weeds too much, but starting in early 1941, all the signs were pointing that the United States was going to enter World War II. There was a very large movement in the United States called America First that wanted to stay out of the war. But different entities realized it wasn't if, it was a matter of when. So in early 1941, the Chemical Corps, who were based up in Maryland, their manufacturing facility was in Maryland, was very, very close to the Atlantic seaboard, and they realized that they needed to find a place to increase their production of things like gas masks, smoke pots, different types of chemical weapons. And they
So let me just ask this now. When you say chemical weapons, those first things we're talking about eventually, and maybe was this not the plan at the beginning to produce mustard gas shells or loaded mustard gas canisters?
Even though there was a treaty in place to prevent that, we wanted to have that capability that in case it was forced on us, we would force it.
So, and then once again, this stuff, we'll just go ahead and kill the suspense here. It was never used in anger during World War II because the Germans, the Americans, all the Allies had dealt with the horrors of chemical weapons in World War I.
Right.
And the worst of them didn't want to go through that again.
Correct.
Am I correct?
Correct.
Okay, but still, you had to have them in case.
Right. And in fact, a very large element of anyway. But let me back up why we're here.
Yeah.
So they sent out a group of officers around the southern U.S. Actually, what we found out recently, they went up even to Omaha, Nebraska, looking for places to build a new chemical manufacturing plant. We know they went to Little Rock, Arkansas. We know they went to Memphis. And all signs pointed to Memphis being the place because Memphis was right on the Mississippi River. So you build the munitions, take them down the Mississippi, Gulf of Mexico, and then out, either to the Pacific Theater or European Theater. And they made a stop here in Huntsville. Well, what's so interesting is they knew the requirements were, the Chemical Corps' requirements were that when they were fully up and running, they would have a workforce of almost 20,000. Well, Huntsville, one of the smallest, actually they also stopped in Florence, Alabama. And Florence, Alabama had a very large manufacturing entity back then. But Huntsville only had about 14,000 men, women, and children. Yeah. But there was a man by the name of Lawrence Goldsmith, Margaret Ann Goldsmith's grandfather.
So the Goldsmith The name is still certainly
Goldsmith,
prevalent in
Schiffman,
Huntsville.
all, that family. And Lawrence Goldsmith was really good friends with a very young congressman named John Sparkman.
Yeah.
John Sparkman was from Huntsville. He was a lawyer here in town, ran for the congressional seat, won it, but a very, very junior congressman. And Lawrence Goldsmith and George Mayonnaise, it's spelled Mahoney, but it's pronounced Mayonnaise. Yeah. They wined and dined these people. And so with the encouragement of John Sparkman and Senator Lister Hill, who was the senior senator, who said to the Chemical Corps people, this one officer, well, listen, you know, no pressure, but if you happen to pick Huntsville for location, I'll make you chief of the Chemical Corps. I'll promote you to general. And so they went back to Washington, and lo and behold, they made a decision to come to Huntsville. And so that decision was published on July the 3rd, 41. In only 30 days, because back then we had no environmental protections, or in 30 days, they broke ground for what is now Redstone Arsenal.
There is the famous picture of the guy turning.
No, that picture actually.
Oh, that was recreated?
No, that picture is. I got to finish the story. So they were going to condemn 40,000 acres in far southern Madison County. You remember, Huntsville was 1 square mile.
Yeah, no, I get it.
And so they thought, well, this is safe. It's far away from Huntsville. It's miles from Huntsville. And it wasn't until, and so the Chemical Corps said, here we are. And they named the installation, the whole installation, 40,000 acres, they named it Huntsville Arsenal. And that name hung around from 1941 until 1949. It was when you mentioned the shoveling picture, the Ordnance Corps saw that the Chemical Corps just bought up 40,000 acres. And they said, hey, listen, since you got 40,000 acres, you know, what are you going to do with 40,000 acres? Do you think we could borrow like 5,000 acres? And they said, oh, no problem. So they gave the Ordnance Corps 5,000 acres on the far southeastern end of the installation, where the FBI's Hazardous Devices School is now.
So it would be off South Parkway, adjacent to the river.
Right.
Approximately.
Right, but way south.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But the rest of the land, so the land like where Marshall Space Flight Center is, was all part of Huntsville Arsenal. In fact, and we're jumping ahead a little bit, but many of the buildings Marshall used for decades, and there are still some buildings they use, were built by the Chemical Corps during World War II, which is absolutely fascinating.
Okay, so 41 is when all this happened, and I have people don't get that when this land, I guess, condemned. Did that what they condemned all this farmland, and there were scores of families living out there, and there are multiple cemeteries on Redstone Arsenal. There's one in the middle of a test area. Right. You know, I mean, and so there were people living there. They weren't Huntsvillians, so to speak, but there were people living there.
They were Madison Countyites.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, so you had communities called Pond Beat, Mullins Flat, Hickory Grove. That's just 3 of the most popular ones. But everywhere on Redstone where you see a cemetery, we know that there was a church nearby. Yeah. And there was probably a community right there around those cemeteries that have not been well maintained.
Okay, so years. 41. How quickly did they ramp up where it went from farms, old farmland, to a going concern where things were being made and tested? How long from 41 on before they...
So they started production in March of 42.
Okay. So they did this quickly.
Very, very quickly. In fact, Building 111, which is on Goss Road, was the headquarters building for Huntsville Arsenal. Yeah. And that building is still in use today. It was built in 42. In fact, the building where the Huntsville Arsenal commander lived, and his 5 principal deputies, those houses still exist.
Yeah.
Which
Didn't they? Is that the? I may be misremembering this, but one of the biggest houses was actually moved, wasn't it? In the not too distant past.
Well, a couple things. There was something called the Lee Mansion, which was moved off post, and then there was an old farmhouse that was on the north end of the installation that was moved to the south end of the installation. And they renamed that the Goddard House. That was
that's
the Goddard House.
Yeah.
Was the VIP house wouldn't get, because remember we had Huntsville up until not that many years ago.
Yeah.
It didn't have a lot of lodging and housing.
Yeah. No, yeah, and that's probably.
And the FBI demolished the Goddard House.
There was an effort. That's one of those efforts that didn't pan. It was an effort to save it, wasn't there?
They were trying to save it because we were coming up on the 75th anniversary in 2016, and there was movement. There was some congressional movement to try to save the house, because I mean we had we had multiple secretaries of defense who stayed there. Yeah. We had secretaries of the Army. We had all these VIPs who stayed at that house because.
So it was a historic part of a historic installation.
Right, but they did not deem that house to be historically significant. Okay.
Just quick aside, as a historian, did you deem it significant?
We deemed it significant in terms of the history of the building, not the structure itself.
All right. Okay, so I've gotten us off track. So they've started production in 42, and they are making. I mean, they're making gas masks and what else?
Well, they're making gas masks. They're making. They're loading shells with white phosphorus.
Okay.
That was, interestingly enough, was produced by a TVA facility in Florence, and then shipped via train to Huntsville Arsenal.
Yeah.
But during World War II, you had 2 separate installations: Huntsville Arsenal, which was most of the land, and then you had Redstone. Now, Redstone, the far southeastern end, the Ordnance Corps was manufacturing more traditional type of ordnance, type.
They were mortar
bombs.
shells. Weren't they manufacturing mortar shells?
Mortars and
there was. I mean, people when I in my former TV career, every time they make noise at the arsenal, despite the fact that they make noise month after month after year after year, people will call and say, "What is that?" And I'd get off the phone after saying they're testing or whatever. I'd say they've been blowing stuff up since 41. You'd have thought people would have gotten used to it.
So interesting side note to that. So they built the Huntsville Arsenal. Remember, there was no Air Force. It was the Army Air Corps. And the Army Air Corps, they built an airstrip, which is now the Redstone Arsenal airfield. Yeah. But they built that airstrip so they could load these bombs into these B-26 Marauders. Yeah. And there was a part of the installation, the Huntsville Arsenal, that was called Little Tokyo. And so when you talk about things being detonated, that goes back to the 1940s.
So they would be doing test runs?
They would do test runs to make sure that these bombs went off.
Wow.
Yeah.
So did they do that a lot?
Yeah. In fact, one of the missions...
And where approximately is that area? Can we pin that down at all?
Yeah, it's right off of Rideout Road. So if you come in off of 565 to Rideout Road, after you pass what is now the Redstone Gateway, you make a right-hand turn, and
that's the airport. What about the test where they dropped the bomb?
We're not quite sure where that was. Remember, it was part of that farmland that we talked about. But probably closer to where some of those test ranges are now.
Oh wow! And how many tests there? That's another thing. When people hear noise, there are multiple areas of the arsenal where you could hear that. Plus, Blue Origin is using one of Marshall's former test stand
stands.
areas,
Right.
To because they refurbished and rebuilt the test stand,
Right.
to test. So there's somebody making noise out there all the time.
Yeah, but what we're hearing now is the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms detonating old ordnance
Okay.
from where we don't know. They don't talk about it. I don't ask.
Okay. So they make these chemical munitions during World War II.
and traditional.
And traditional. Okay, so it ramped up to how many? You said initially they wanted to have a workforce of some 20,000 people.
Right.
What did it get to during the
It
height
got
of
to
the war?
20,000.
And so that increased Huntsville's population, but I'm assuming it was from all around North Alabama.
It was, and Tennessee. In
Yeah.
fact, the first woman to die on a production line, she was from Fayetteville, Tennessee.
Okay.
Her
So-
name was Easter Posey.
You know, I never thought of Easter Posey. Let's make sure we give her her unfortunate due. But did many people die out there during World War II when they were building?
I think
making these things?
I think the whole number is maybe about 20 people died.
Okay, and this was doing some pretty serious stuff too.
Right, because we did not have the type of safety stuff we have
Oh
now.
yeah, well, and it will. I would assume that during World War II, with the urgency of having to do things, there were safety procedures, but maybe not like there would be now.
Right,
Because
right.
we got a war to win.
Right.
And okay, so they do this for World War II. World War II ends. So we've got. Am I correct that most of the chemical munitions were stored at the arsenal?
There were some that were stored. Of course, we had a lot of stuff that was overseas that had come back.
Oh, that's right. But these were never used, but always ready to be used if
Right,
necessary.
and so one of the great mysteries still in 2025 is where all this stuff was buried.
Well, I want to ask you about that. I've done news stories about Redstone Arsenal is under a probably never going to end cleanup.
Right, we
because-
are an EPA super site.
And mostly, am I correct? Well, there was rocket fuel from later work on the south end of the arsenal, but mostly chemical, the empty canisters that had held the mustard gas or whatever. That's what was mostly buried. Am I correct?
Yeah, and but also a lot of traditional ordnance.
Okay.
In fact-
was it demilled?
No.
Had its innards taken out?
No,
It was just
that,
buried.
That was the problem. Yeah, in fact, the FBI. I think right before you retired, you saw the FBI was building this brand new, big, gigantic
Yeah.
facility,
Yeah.
very, very close to Marshall, and when they were putting in conduit, and they came across an unexploded World War II bomb. This is
Well, I've
Just a
actually,
few
I've
years
actually
ago.
heard that that's happened many times. where they've
many,
come
many
across
times. When I first started in the 80s, that was a common occurrence where they were digging a new water line and they would come across an unexploded bomb.
Now, this leads me to something that I was told by somebody involved in the cleanup, is that it's hard to understand now, but when they buried these things, dug a trench, pushed it in with a bulldozer, covered the trench back up, and nobody thought to make a map of where it was.
Correct.
They just buried this stuff, and they buried it. So they had it. So whatever records there were lost or destroyed. So they ended up having to reconstruct where things might be using telegrams and letters people wrote and things
Yeah.
like that. Is that true?
People from people's memories, yeah. But there's huge chunks of the south end of the arsenal
Yeah.
that say, stay out, beware, and people cannot go out there without an expert. And they're still coming across these
And
sites.
so they certainly can't build anything without checking.
Right,
it.
and that's why the public affairs office now today
Yeah.
will say that we only have X number of acres of where we can safely put a building because of all that stuff on the south end.
Yeah. Okay, one other thing. If you drive around Redstone Arsenal, there's a lot of swamp area out there anyway. But there's also a lot of signs saying, do not drink the groundwater.
Yeah.
So it's not so and that, I would assume part of that is from testing, but part of that is not knowing what might be buried under that.
That's correct.
Okay, so all right, so all that went on after World War II, and with something else that's interesting. A lot of the mustard gas canisters were emptied. The chemicals were emptied into freight cars, tanker cars, and taken up to Maryland.
I don't
I believe
remember
it
all
was
the different
taken up.
sites.
The chemicals were by train. Can you imagine the brouhaha now?
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, it's kind of almost one of the grace of God things that something bad didn't happen.
What's so interesting is, so you're familiar. You've been on Redstone a bunch of times. You're familiar with all the igloos on the south end of the post. Well, we have been assured for decades that all these igloos are all cleared out. There's nothing in these things. Well, anyway, about 15 years ago, somebody said, let's just double check these igloos. And they found an igloo with mustard gas. But the Army was very, very transparent about it. I mean, they brought in all these different hazmat people.
But it's interesting because about 15 years ago, you said?
Yeah.
So had that been discovered 45 years ago, they would have just
said, "Oh, well, we'll
we
throw
got
it
mustard
away.
gas. What are we going to do with it? I don't know.
We'll put it in the city
move it
dump."
somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay, so they did all the demilling, and that process continued, and then Redstone Arsenal, Huntsville Arsenal, sort of then didn't have a purpose. Did we kind of have to go through that period?
True, and you're sort of right. So,
Well, sort of right's kind of the
what's
state of my
so
life.
interesting is Mike Baker, who was the command historian out there for decades, who I worked for. He was my mentor. So what's interesting about Mike was mentored by the installation's first historian, a lady by the name of Mary T. Cagle. And then he started working out here in '79 and was mentored under her. And then she retired, and then I went to work for Mike 35 years ago in 1990. So I was mentored under the person who was mentored by the first historian. Anyway, when we were doing the 75th anniversary of Redstone book, we went to the Huntsville Times morgue, which is at the public library in the probate judge's office, and we found an article in there, an op-ed piece where they said the Chemical Corps assures us that this is not a war baby, that this is installation that will be here forever, even when the war ends.
Yeah.
And what's so interesting, the war ends, and the Chemical Corps said, "Oh, well, peace on earth forever. We'll never have another war like this again. We're out of here." And hence the hasty, sloppy piling, cleaning everything up and saying, "Oh, we're out of here."
Yeah.
Now, the Ordnance Corps, who had that property down the south end, Ordnance Corps said, "You know what? Not so fast. We don't think there's going to be peace on earth forever." And of course they were right. So they put their facilities on standby status. Hence why when the Korean War started, what people don't realize is we started producing traditional munitions.
And this is at Redstone Arsenal.
Right.
The arsenal, okay.
Right, but we started producing traditional munitions again during the rocket era. In fact, we finally shut down production of traditional ordnance in '57.
Okay.
So people think, well, World War II ended. We didn't produce any more. I'm doing air quotes here. Bombs.
I was kind of in that. I didn't realize we did that to 57.
And that's one of the unknown stories is that we continued to produce stuff at the south end of the installation.
Okay.
But anyway, the war ends, and Huntsville Arsenal is actually put up for sale.
Yeah, I've seen pictures of
Pictures.
the
Huntsville Arsenal for sale. But in the interim, they leased out different buildings to different entities. The most famous story is of the Keller Motor Car Company.
It was made mostly of wood, or a
lot of it of wood. Yeah, wood
of
frame.
wood. Yeah,
wood frame.
This was a car,
Right.
and it was there are still some
In town.
in town. I mean, I have seen one before, and it's It's just odd to think that they did that.
Yeah, in fact, so that they finally bulldozed that building down because of asbestos, but that building was right off of Rideout Road, where the Rocket Park is right now, at the Marshall within the Marshall Center, and in 2013, they bought back. Before they bulldozed down the building, they bought back all the Keller motor cars. In fact, Dick Christensen came out and filmed some of that.
Okay.
And everybody, I took pictures. It was absolutely fascinating to see all the Keller motor cars coming back.
Dick Christensen, who once worked at Channel 19 as Dick Curtis, and actually ended his career working out on the Arsenal.
Right.
Working for the Army, and I think he was still working when that when the Keller cars.
Yeah, I think he was working for a contractor.
Yeah,
so AV support.
So we took the pictures.
But Dick has this unbelievable archive of stuff.
Yeah. Well, of the stories he did at 19. So we go through the Huntsville Arsenal for sale some. Then the next big thing, in fact, I suppose the savior for the majority of the land that is now referred to as Redstone Arsenal, was a decision to bring the German rocket team here from Fort Bliss.
Again, just like the story of how a conglomeration of different people and entities came together for the decision to build Huntsville Arsenal, the same thing happened. So in 1945, there was an ordnance intelligence officer named Holger Toftoy. And Toftoy his job was to find out where these rockets were coming from that were being dropped into England from Holland. And again, he was an intelligence officer within the Ordnance Corps.
Yeah.
And it was von Braun's brother who actually sought out Toftoy and surrendered to him and said, yeah, this is where the team is.
This is Magnus.
You're right.
Yeah.
Who, when he retired, he opened up a liquor store in Arizona, which is a whole different story. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
The story of the different individuals.
It's fascinating.
The German rocket team.
Anyway, so they go to Fort Bliss, Texas, to show the Army how they built these V2s, how they fired them. They were working with different Army defense contractors. And so by 1948-49, there was no room at Fort Bliss for them to continue their development work.
And they were also having to travel from Fort Bliss to
White Sands,
which is not that, but it's about an hour.
Right. But it had to be far away because they were throwing rockets up in space.
And they were figuring all the different ways you could use V2s.
Right. So Toftoy sees or hears that the Army is getting ready to sell this massive amount of land. And it was Toftoy who went to the Chief of Staff of the Army and said, and showed him the blueprints for the installation, and literally went on his hands and knees on the floor of the Chief of Staff of the Army's office and said, hey, this is perfect. We already paid for this land. They got buildings there. We think we can retrofit them. And so it was Toftoy who convinced the Army to move this rocket team from Fort Bliss to Huntsville, Alabama.
Yeah.
Now, at the time, you would think, oh, that was a big deal in terms of all these people coming up. No, it was 127 rocket scientists plus their families. Actually, we interviewed Ant Stuhlinger, one of the principals who died when he was in the late 90s. And he said, because for years the Army had published a history saying that they arrived here in April of 1950. And so we went up on Monsanto and interviewed Stuhlinger. He goes, no. He said, a bunch of us went back to Germany, got our families, had to get our families and then either by plane or ship,
Yeah.
come and move to this Huntsville, and Huntsville was not ready. We had a housing crunch back then,
Yeah.
as we
Yeah.
do now. So it was a very, very slow buildup.
Well, and just and I forget which one of the. I think it was Axel Roth, who's his dad was one of the original German rocket scientists, and Axel grew up here. He went to Huntsville High, went to Auburn, and went to work for Marshall Space Flight Center in 1964. He talked about they drove by car.
A bunch of
He talked about the ship and going to Fort Bliss and then coming by car.
Right.
And it was like he said it was a couple of day trip.
Right,
And he said
because there's no interstate.
He said he said I believe he told me they camped on the side of the road, or pulled off in an area and camped when they were coming.
Yeah.
So it wasn't. I don't know how people, like you said, I think people visualize this big transport of all the German rockets.
It wasn't.
It wasn't. These were said, y'all are here. You need to go there.
Yeah,
It was like that.
And another interesting story. Anyway, but getting back real quickly to the administrative part of Huntsville Arsenal. So when the Army made the decision, so there was a Huntsville Times article announcing that we were going to move the rocket team, that this was going to be a Center for Rocket Research and Development. Of course, people didn't know what rocket research and development meant or anything like that. Remember, you said early in the interview, you said there's a picture of a guy doing a shoveling dirt, breaking ground. Well, that picture was taken October of 41, and that was at the time Major Carroll D. Hudson.
Yeah.
And he was the commander of Redstone, the Redstone entity of the
by the time
the time of World War II.
Yeah.
And so they bought Hudson back in 1950 because he was an engineer. And it was Hudson, they bought him back as the base commander to help with the building, so they would do, what the requirements were for building rockets and stuff like that, which is interesting because Hudson was such a critical figure in the history.
Well, and just dropping back just a little bit, Holger Toftoy, it does feel like, well, first of all, the Germans might not have, the von Braun team might not have ended up in the U.S. without him and Operation Paperclip. They certainly might not have ended up here, and yet, except for Toftoy Road out on the Arsenal, I think there's also a Toftoy Road right before you get on the Arsenal near
off of Patton.
Gate 8 and Gate 10. But he's like this guy who was instrumental in this largest city in
the state.
And yet hardly anybody knows about Holger Toftoy.
Right. And Toftoy, as you know, at Big Spring Park, so when Toftoy was leaving Redstone in 58, they had a big celebration. They called him, because his nickname was Mr. Missile.
Yeah.
And the monument that the city gave to dedicate to Toftoy is at Big Spring Park today. If you walk from the courthouse down the steps, you get to that first landing, and right there is the monument to Holger Toftoy. Now, there's also a Medeiros Road, and we're going to talk about John Bruce Medeiros in a second. Another instrumental figure.
So the German rocket team is here. They're ramping up work, and it was about the time when they're ramping up that General Medeiros took over command. Or was that a little bit later?
The Germans had done a lot of work prior to Medeiros showing up. So the first,
I meant but the work here. Or had they been doing work here?
Yes, a lot of work here.
Okay.
So the first thing that their first mission was to take the lessons learned from the V2 and create a guided missile for the Army. And they initially named it Major because we had a small missile called a Private. We had a little bit bigger missile called a Corporal. So they're going to do a missile called Major. You get
Yeah.
you get the theme: private, corporal, major.
Yeah.
And they decide to rename it Redstone. In fact, Redstone, the Redstone missile, which is so important in not just Redstone's history, but the history of U.S. spaceflight, as you know, is the only missile to be named for the installation where it was created.
Yeah, the Redstone, and a couple of interesting that way. I got it from you, but there's a picture of the Redstone on display at Grand Central Station,
Right.
in New York, and the modified Redstone is what
Took
took the Explorer.
Correct.
Our response to Sputnik. There's so much stuff surrounding
I
all
know.
this stuff, but the Russians, the Soviets launched the Sputnik, scared everybody. It's hard to understand how scared everybody was.
Right.
And we launched Explorer as a response to show we could do it. Although, and I know you know this, I interviewed Ernst Stuhlinger, and he said more than once, we could have launched before the Russians had they let us.
In 1955, yeah. In 1955, they had already been tinkering around and modified the Redstone. And the White House specifically sent orders down: do not orbit anything. Yeah, we know that this thing could go around the planet, but we don't
And
want...
this was Cold War stuff. This
Cold War
this was
stuff,
scared,
yeah.
and everything I guess was built around not starting a nuclear war.
Right.
And-
And a lot of it, when we talk about the rocket team, and there's nothing definitive, but going back to when Toftoy captured the German rocket team, all right, he wanted to bring back 300 members of this team. Eisenhower, the commander-in-chief, right, at the time, he was still the commander-in-chief of Europe, told Toftoy absolutely not, because Eisenhower hated the Germans. Even though he was of German heritage, he hated the Germans.
Well, this was the end of a horrible war.
Horrible war, right. And he gave Toftoy an order. This is a 5-star general who gives the order to a colonel saying, absolutely not, 100 are allowed to come, only 100. Toftoy defies the order and brings back 127. Now, what happened to the rest of the German rocket team? Well, many of them were captured by the Soviet Union. And they were put to work under less than favorable conditions to develop the Soviet space program. And that's one part that gets missing. And the other thing, going back to what you just mentioned about that when Stuhlinger said we could have done it earlier, it was Eisenhower who said, absolutely not, because our feeling, Mike Baker's and my feeling, our gist of it, is he did not want the first U.S. anything to go up built by a bunch of Germans. It was because it was utter hatred for Germans. And when
this was, and it's another thing. This was still very close
to the end of World War II.
We're 10 years out,
right?
And I mean, and so now World War II's, most people read about it in history books, but to my parent, my dad, and
my dad,
your dad, it was fresh. I mean, it was really fresh,
right?
And so Eisenhower, I mean, it makes sense that he said one thing, he dealt with it twice,
right,
and maybe made a mistake both times,
but he wanted. The Navy was working on something called Vanguard, and so he thought, well, this is safe. No damn Germans working on this thing, just the Navy. But of course, Navy. What does the Navy missile want to do? It wants to go into the ground because, just like all things in the water, it wants to go down. And sure enough, when they tried to launch Vanguard, it went into the ground. So Eisenhower.
Are you talking about the famous live broadcast?
Yes.
Of the Vanguard test, and it explodes in flames, and after that said, and there's the famous. They decided, well, maybe we need to let the guys at Redstone Arsenal.
Yeah, but it was remarkable speed, because anybody who works at the Arsenal knows you can't order paper in 30 days, and they got the order to go ahead and launch Explorer 1 on November the 8th. 57 and January 31st, less than 90 days.
Yeah, they launched.
You can't do anything on Redstone in less than 90 days.
You
can't get your badge in less than 90 days on Redstone.
And from what I understand, getting a security clearance now
takes a lot longer than
It
90
takes
days.
a long time.
And another interesting side story is in 1955, somebody in the government was looking around at all these German rocket scientists working on all this classified missiles, because back then everything was classified.
Yeah.
And they said, wait a second, we got these people working on American secrets. These are all German citizens. We got to do something about it. Really,
Wow.
really.
I didn't think about it, because I remember they did.
So they very, very hastily had 2 mass citizenship ceremonies. One was in Birmingham, but one was 70 years ago, this past April,
Yeah.
at the brand new Huntsville High School, which is located
And
currently
it's now-
on Bob Wallace.
And that auditorium, though, I went to Huntsville High. The auditorium was still there when I was in high
Right.
school, but the auditorium and that Huntsville High School that was new then is gone now. There's another Huntsville High School there.
Right.
But
it was on the same location.
yeah, well, it was but the fact that I
Walked the halls.
it was on stage at one time for this something.
But
yeah,
that's
amazing.
And that was absolutely interesting,
Okay, so they did the Redstone, and then we just touched on the modified Redstone being used to put, for the first couple of launches. Well, the Explorer and Shepard's launch.
Well, we have Explorer 1, we had Explorer 2,
Yeah.
which blew up, but we did have Explorer 3 and 4, and then we modified the Jupiter. Okay, well, we have to get back to. So we mentioned von Braun coming, the head of the German rocket team. But we had this guy come in 1956, February 1st, 56. The Army sends down a 2-star general named John Bruce Medeiros. Medeiros he forged his birth certificate, and as a young teenager, he actually served in World War I in the fields of France.
I did not know that. We could do a whole interview about him.
Medeiros is a whole different thing.
Yeah,
But anyway, Medeiros' job was to really take what the von Braun team had started and put it on steroids. And the first job, his first mission, was development of something called a Jupiter. And the Jupiter plays just an important role in the history of spaceflight and getting to the moon. And
Now, am I correct? The Jupiter was part Redstone and part.
No, it was a very, very well. It was a new creation.
Okay.
Everything
so-
they had
okay,
learned with Redstone, but remember, Redstone only had 200 mile and change
Yeah.
range. The Jupiter was to be a 1,500 mile intermediate range ballistic missile.
Okay.
And at the time that they started creating this in '56, and then because of a Secretary of Defense mission, modified mission thing, it had to be turned over to the Air Force. Actually, the Air Force trained on Jupiters right off of Patton Road. We have these aerial shots of these huge missiles, and Jupiters were big.
Yeah.
But the Jupiters, like, put up the first space monkeys, Abel and Baker. Remember Miss Baker, who was at the Space Rocket Center for decades. And the Jupiter was a big carrier.
Okay.
The first lunar satellite.
But it never was used as a missile, was it?
Yes.
Was it called Jupiter?
Yes. In fact, the funny thing about Jupiter is
I feel bad that I don't know this.
we started deploying these things in northeastern Turkey.
Okay.
And so if you know your geography, from northeastern Turkey to Moscow, oh, wow, that's within 1,500 miles.
Yeah.
So we started deploying these Jupiters within range of Moscow, And the Soviets said, oh, wait a second. If you're going to put missiles in range of us, we're going to find a place to put range of missiles on you. So Khrushchev started deploying missiles to Cuba, hence the Cuban Missile Crisis.
All right.
And the agreement to remove the missiles from Cuba in exchange for us moving, that was kept classified, secret.
So that was the end of the Cuban Missile Crisis when we...
And then another side story in terms of Redstone's history is that under Medeiros, they started this thing which eventually evolved into what is now the Missile and Space Intelligence Center. He wanted to start up an office that kept track of what the Soviets were doing. And by 1962, now this office was under the direction of the Missile Command. This office, actually, they flew in. So in the movies, it shows that they fly these pictures into Washington and these people analyze the stuff in Washington. They actually flew those pictures of the missiles in Cuba to a place called Redstone Arsenal.
Wow. Yeah, you can't even drive on the parking lot of that place now.
No, you cannot.
You can't. I don't know. We won't talk about what they do there.
But it was interesting because whenever we would get a request from them, from what is now the Missile and Space Intelligence Center, they would say, hey, we're looking for information on so-and-so missile. Do you got that? And we'd say, oh, sure. And then, what's your number? This is before email, right? And you call them back, and the way they would answer the phone is they'd say 78229.
Just the name of the building.
5427. They wouldn't give their name.
Okay. Wow.
But anyway, digress. So it was Medeiros. So it was under Medeiros that that Explorer 1 went up.
Yeah.
It was under Medeiros that we got the first. In fact, what people don't realize, we just had the history of the anniversary of the moon landing.
Yeah.
The Saturn was actually started under the Army.
Yes,
the Army started the Saturn program in 1958.
Yeah, the Saturn 1.
Right.
Which was...
But back then they didn't know there'd be
I know.
Saturn 2, 3, 4, 5.
It got bigger and bigger and bigger.
But the idea of a true rocket to send people... In fact, we have a film, I just found it again. They actually had predicted back in the late 50s that the Saturn could take humans, and drop them on the moon. This was considered, they had this bizarre animations they showed on this thing.
Okay, so we need to find an end spot here. So all this stuff's going on with Jupiter. We've launched Explorer. We're doing the monkeys and all that stuff. In 1958, the government...
October 58.
...created NASA, and in 1960... Marshall Space Flight Center was created. I'm getting a phone call for my next interview.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
So it's like that. But in 1960, everybody leaves this building working for the Army, and when they go back inside after the ceremony, half of them work for Marshall.
4,600 Army employees. That's unbelievable. Okay.
Yeah.
Literally on the 1st of July, 1960, they had a ceremony built in front of building 4488, and they put up a sign. In fact, the first Marshall Space Flight Center headquarters was inside an Army building. And it was because of that decision. The decision to create Eisenhower, I think he did the right thing. He wanted to take space away from the military. And when Eisenhower made the decision in 1959 that he would take the von Braun group and take them away from the Army, made Medeiros want to retire. But Medeiros and Toftoy, these people were in the national media. They were on.
They were on.
No. They were on.
Toftoy was on. He was on these TV shows.
No, he was. Toftoy was on This Is Your Life.
Yeah, that's one.
Medeiros was on multiple times on Meet the Press.
Yeah. So.
And he this little 2-star general sparred with the White House, sparred with Eisenhower, you know. But yeah, everything that, the bottom line so as Army historians, is everything that the Army started is what is now on the arsenal. In fact, the missile school that we had for decades, their work starting in 2001, working with the FBI to show soldiers how to demilitarize bombs, started that whole work with the FBI, and the FBI said, "Hey, you guys got all this land. We could have a training facility here."
So it all
the FBI, NASA, all of that came out of what was started with the Army, with in an office that's downtown Huntsville. This the letters we still have of Lawrence Goldsmith typing up letters to John Sparkman back and forth.
All right, Claus Martel, thank you. We're gonna talk again. We're gonna take this history forward, but thank you for this.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. And thank you for being on DigitalWERX. This is our data zone, and we'll go ahead and say what we say on any of our podcasts. Remember, it works.